I still remember the day my son walked into the living room with that look on his face. The look that told me something was wrong, even before he opened his mouth. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a confession. "The business is gone. It's over." At first, I thought I had misheard him. The family business, the one his father and I had poured our entire lives into, couldn't just be gone. We had spent decades building it, surviving recessions, sleepless nights, betrayals from partners, and the cruel unpredictability of the market. But somehow, we always survived. So how could it be over? He looked at me with eyes that avoided mine, like he was ashamed. Or maybe he was hiding something. "It just collapsed," he explained, rushing through his words. "Bad deals, debts piling up. I had no choice but to shut it down. I'll try to cover what I can, but there's almost nothing left. Your share," he hesitated, "your share is $10,000. $10,000? My heart dropped. 10,000 wasn't even a fraction of what the business was worth. We had properties, inventory, assets, loyal clients. We weren't millionaires, but we were secure. Or so I thought. I wanted to believe him. He was my son, the boy I raised, the boy I trusted. But as he spoke, something inside me stirred, a quiet, gnawing suspicion. Because when a man says a business is gone, but he can't look his own mother in the eye, something isn't adding up. And that was the day my story began. The day I decided I wouldn't take his word for it. The day I chose to track every dollar back. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I replayed every detail in my mind. His nervous hands, the stammer in his voice, the way he avoided details about how it all collapsed. Was I being paranoid, or was there more beneath the surface? By morning, I had made up my mind. If my son thought I would quietly accept his explanation, he didn't know me at all. I was going to dig. I was going to uncover the truth, and I was going to reveal every secret, no matter how deeply he tried to bury it. Because family or not, betrayal has a way of cutting the deepest. And if he thought he could play me for a fool, he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. When my son told me the business was gone, those words cut deeper than he could ever know. Because for me, it wasn't just a business. It was the story of my life. A story written in sweat, sacrifice, and silent prayers whispered at midnight when I wasn't sure we would make it through another day. I can still remember the very beginning. My late husband and I were young, too young, maybe, with nothing more than a dream and a stubborn belief that if we worked hard enough, we could build something out of nothing. We didn't have investors or trust funds or rich relatives backing us. What we had was grit. He had 2 steady hands and a vision, and I had a notebook filled with ideas and the determination to stand beside him no matter how hard it got. Our first office, with a leaky little building on the edge of town. The roof groaned whenever it rained, and the walls were thin enough to hear the wind whistling through. We couldn't afford proper furniture, so we used crates for chairs and a secondhand cable for a desk. I still remember bringing in a little pot of flowers to sit on the windowsill, just so the place didn't feel so empty. People laughed at us back then. They said we wouldn't last 6 months. They said the market was too tough, that we were too small, that we didn't have the experience. But every time someone doubted us, my husband would squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "Let them talk. We'll prove them wrong." And we did. It wasn't easy. There were nights when he came home so tired his hand shook as he tried to eat dinner.
There were weeks when I had to choose between paying the electricity bill for the business or buying new shoes for our growing boy. I can still see myself at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, trying to stretch every dollar, making lists, scratching numbers out, praying to God I hadn't made a mistake. But we never gave up. Slowly, painfully, the business began to grow. A few loyal clients turned into many. One truck turned into two. One cramped office turned into a bigger one. There was a day, I remember it like it was yesterday, when we signed our first big contract. My husband walked through the front door, his tie loosened, his hair a mess, but his smile, oh, that smile lit up the whole room. He picked me up off the ground and spun me around like we were kids again. "We did it," he said. "We're gonna be okay." From then on, we poured everything we had into that company. Every decision, every risk, every late night, it was all for the sake of building something lasting, something that would outlive us both. We didn't just see it as a business. It was our family legacy. We taught that to our son. He grew up watching us work, watching us struggle, watching us persevere. He saw his father wake before the sun, his shirt already damp with sweat before breakfast. He saw me balancing books at the table while stirring a pot on the stove. We told him over and over, this isn't just about money. It's about trust. It's about honesty. It's about building something that people can believe in. That company became part of our identity. It wasn't just how we made a living. It was who we were. I can still see the pride in my husband's eyes the day we expanded to a second location. He stood there, shoulders straight, voice firm, thanking every worker by name. He never forgot the people who stood with us. He believed in treating every employee like family because he remembered the days when it was just him and one other man trying to keep the lights on. He used to say, "A business built only on money will fall, but a business built on people, trust, and hard work, that will last forever." I believed him. And that's why when my son looked me in the eye years later and told me the business was gone, the ground beneath me cracked. Because he wasn't just telling me that some numbers on a spreadsheet had disappeared. He was saying that everything we had worked for, the nights of hunger, the sacrifices, the tears, the victories, all of it had been reduced to nothing. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. You see, this wasn't just a business I could walk away from. It was the last living piece of my husband. He poured his heart into it until the very day he died. Even in the hospital, with tubes in his arms and the doctors warning me time was short, he still asked me, "How's the company doing? Are the men taken care of? Are the bills paid?" Those were his last concerns. Not himself, not his pain, but the business and the family it represented. So when my son told me it had all vanished, I felt something inside me break. Not just because of the money, though yes, the money mattered, but because it meant, in his words, that my husband's life's work had evaporated. And deep down, I couldn't believe that. I wouldn't believe it. Because I knew my husband too well. I knew the systems he built, the values he left behind, the strength he gave me. A legacy like that doesn't just vanish overnight. So yes, when my son said the business was gone, what he didn't realize was that he wasn't just threatening my finances. He was threatening my memories, my identity, the very foundation of who I was. And that is something no one, not even my own flesh and blood, could take away without a fight. That night, as I lay awake in the dark, I pressed my hand against the old wooden headboard my husband had carved himself. I thought about all the nights he had come home exhausted, all the mornings he left before dawn, all the promises we made to each other that we were building something permanent. And I whispered into the silence, "If you're watching, I promise you this. I won't let him bury what we built, not without knowing the truth." Because this was no longer just about money. This was about trust. This was about betrayal. This was about the very legacy of our family. And I was not going to let it slip through my fingers.
When my son told me the business was gone, I tried to believe him. I wanted to. A mother wants to trust her child more than anyone else in the world. But as he spoke, something in his voice trembled, and the more I replayed his words, the less they made sense. He said debts had piled up. He said deals had gone bad. He said there was nothing left but scraps. Yet when I asked for details, for papers, for proof, there was nothing. No receipts, no contracts, no final balance sheets. Just words. Empty words, strung together like excuses whispered by a guilty man. I asked him, gently at first, "Where are the records? Where is the paperwork from the accountant?" He shifted in his chair, his eyes flicking away from mine. "It was messy, Mom. Too messy. You wouldn't understand the details. I handled what I could." That was the first red flag. My husband had taught me every corner of that business. I balanced the books for years. I knew every supplier, every cost, every trick, and every trap. For him to tell me I wouldn't understand was not just insulting, it was suspicious. And then came the number, $10,000. He slid it across the table like it was some kind of mercy. $10,000 for my share of a company that had taken 3 decades to build? I stared at that figure, and in my mind, I saw the buildings, the trucks, the land, the contracts. I saw the workers who depended on us, the clients who had trusted us. 10,000 wasn't even a fraction of the truth. It was a lie dressed up as generosity. Something inside me shifted that day. A quiet voice began to whisper, "He is hiding something." I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just grieving still, clinging too tightly to the past. Maybe I didn't want to accept reality. But the voice inside me would not be silenced. Because lies have a smell, a hesitation, a crack in the tone, and I smelled it in every word he spoke. So I began to watch, not loudly, not with confrontation, but silently in the corners of the day. I noticed little things, the new watch on his wrist, the way his car seemed newer, shinier than before, the nights he came home later than usual with excuses that tripped over each other like children in the dark. And then, one afternoon, the first piece of truth fell into my lap. He had left a folder on the counter, carelessly, as if it meant nothing. While he was in the shower, I reached for it. My hands trembled as I opened the cover, afraid of what I might find. Inside was a single invoice, not old, not canceled, current, paid in full, and not just for pennies. It was a contract worth tens of thousands of dollars, money still flowing, business still alive. The business was not gone. In that moment, the whisper inside me turned into a roar. He had lied. My own son had looked me in the eye and told me everything was lost, while behind my back, money was still being made. I closed the folder and slipped it back exactly where I found it, my heart pounding in my chest. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, this was only the beginning.
After finding that invoice, I couldn't sleep. My son's words echoed in my head, but now they were wrapped in suspicion. He said the business was gone. He said there was nothing left. And yet there it was, proof of life, tucked inside a folder he thought I would never touch. I decided I couldn't take his word for anything anymore. If I wanted the truth, I would have to find it myself. Quietly, carefully, without tipping him off. So the next morning, I picked up the phone and started calling old contacts, men and women I had worked with for years, people who knew me, who trusted me. I kept my voice steady, casual, as though I was just checking in after a long silence. "Strange," one of them said to me. "I thought the company was doing really well lately. Just last month, I heard you'd taken on a big contract." My chest tightened. Just last month, a big contract, and yet my son had told me the company had collapsed. Another contact, a supplier, laughed when I asked about closing down. Closing? That's news to me. I delivered a shipment only 2 weeks ago. Everything seemed normal. Piece by piece, the story unraveled. What he told me and what the world knew were two very different things. Still, I needed more. Words alone wouldn't be enough. So one afternoon, when I knew he was out, I drove to the office. I hadn't been there in months, not since my husband's funeral. My hands shook as I turned the key and stepped inside. The place looked alive, not dead, not collapsed. Desks were tidy, paper stacked neatly. A faint smell of coffee lingered in the air, as if someone had only just left. On the wall, the calendar was marked with deadlines, meetings, orders, all recent, all active. I ran my fingers over the desk where my husband once sat, the wood worn smooth by years of hard work. I closed my eyes and whispered, "You were right. It isn't gone." But then the fear crept in. If the business was alive, why would my son lie to me? What had he done? I checked the drawers, the cabinets, flipping through ledgers and files. Most of what I found seemed routine. But then, there it was. A bank statement. Crisp, folded, tucked into a file that didn't belong to it. My breath caught as I opened it. Numbers leapt off the page, large amounts of money. Not trickling, flowing. Deposits, transfers, payments. The business wasn't dead. It was moving, breathing, earning. And he had told me it was all gone. I pressed the paper to my chest, my heart racing. The betrayal sank deeper, sharper than before. This wasn't just a lie of convenience. This was a lie with intention, a lie meant to erase me, to cut me out. And now I knew. He hadn't just misleaded me, he was hiding something big. I folded the statement back and slid it into place, every nerve in my body on fire. I walked out of that office quietly, locking the door behind me, my face calm though my soul was raging. Because now I understood one thing with absolute clarity. There was still money moving somewhere, and I was going to find every last dollar.
Once I knew there was still money flowing, I couldn't turn back. Every bone in my body told me to dig deeper, to peel back each layer until the truth was staring me in the face. So I began my quiet investigation. I went through old boxes of records, invoices, and ledgers that I had kept tucked away in the attic. My husband had always told me, "Keep the papers, numbers don't lie." Now those dusty files became my lifeline. Night after night, I spread them out across the dining room table. Contracts, receipts, tax forms, copies of checks. Each one held a memory. Each one carried the weight of years of sacrifice. I remembered the nights my husband fell asleep at that same table, pen still in hand. I remembered the times we celebrated a paid invoice because it meant we could buy groceries for another week. These papers weren't just ink and numbers. They were fragments of my life. And slowly, as I traced the trail, the picture began to form. The assets hadn't disappeared. They had been shifted. Accounts drained from one place, quietly filled in another. Trucks we had once owned were suddenly listed under different names. Properties once tied to the company had been transferred out. It was as though a magician had swept his hands across the board, making things vanish in plain sight. Only they hadn't vanished at all. They had been moved, hidden. And the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't bad luck. This was deliberate. My son hadn't just told me the business collapsed. He had carved me out of it, carefully, piece by piece, while keeping everything alive for himself. The realization hit me like a blow to the chest. My own child, the boy I had raised with my own hands, had decided that my share, my blood, my years, my sacrifices didn't matter. He wanted it all, and he thought I would never notice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront him, to throw the papers in his face and demand answers. But I didn't, because anger might give him warning, and warning might give him time to cover his tracks. So instead, I kept my silence. I became a ghost in my own house, pretending to believe him, nodding at his stories, smiling at his lies. All the while, my heart burned with the truth I carried. And then came the moment that sealed everything. It was another statement, tucked inside a folder, slipped between invoices as if by accident. But this one was different. This one wasn't just numbers or vague transfers. It was undeniable proof. A large sum of money had been moved directly into his personal account. Money that should have been shared. Money that should have been mine. I sat there, staring at the page, my hands trembling. The betrayal was no longer a whisper, no longer a suspicion. It was fact. I folded the statement carefully and slid it back, my face calm, though my blood was fire. Because now I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, he hadn't just lied. He had stolen, and he had no idea that I was watching every step he took.
The night I found proof, I sat in the dark, with the papers spread out in front of me, rehearsing the words I wanted to hurl at him. I imagined the confrontation, my voice shaking with rage, his face falling in shock, the truth spilling out like broken glass between us. But when the sun rose and I heard his footsteps in the hallway, I froze. My anger pressed against my ribs, begging to be released. Yet something stopped me. Because anger would give him warning, and warning would give him time to hide what I hadn't yet uncovered. So instead of shouting, I smiled. Instead of accusing, I nodded. I told him I understood. I told him I believed the business was gone, that I accepted the $10,000 as my share. My words tasted like poison, but I forced them out, and he believed me. From that moment on, I became an actress in my own home. I played the role of the trusting mother, the broken widow, the woman who knew nothing. But behind my eyes, I studied him. I saw the changes. The clothes he wore, finer than before, tailored to fit him just so. The car he drove, not new, but newer than he should have afforded with a collapsed business. The watch glinting on his wrist, the dinners he attended, the quiet pride in his smile whenever he thought I wasn't looking. Each detail was another dagger, twisting deeper into me. Because every glimmer of luxury I saw on him was a piece of my husband's sacrifice, my own years of work, turned into selfish gain. And yet, what broke me most wasn't the money. It was the betrayal. This was my child, the boy I had held in my arms, the boy I had taught to walk, to speak, to pray, the boy his father had carried on his shoulders, showing him the office, saying, "One day, this will be yours."
And now that boy had turned our legacy into his personal treasure chest, shutting me out as though I had never existed. Some nights, I wept into my pillow, silent sobs so he wouldn't hear. Other nights, I stared at the ceiling, my tears dried by a rising fire inside me. Because heartbreak was only the beginning. Slowly, carefully, that heartbreak hardened into resolve. If I confronted him too soon, he would bury the money deeper, cover his tracks, twist his words until I had no proof left. No, my revenge could not be born out of impulse. It had to be patient. It had to be precise. It had to cut him down in the very place he thought he was safest. So I waited. I smiled at his lies. I nodded at his excuses. I played the fool, all the while gathering the pieces, building my case step by careful step. And deep inside, I made a promise. When the time came, his betrayal would not only be revealed, it would destroy the false kingdom he thought he had built.
I began building my case the way my husband used to build a business. Piece by piece, with patience, care, and a stubborn refusal to cut corners. I made a list, long and precise. What did I need? Paperwork, witnesses, dates, trail of transfers, names, places. Anything that could turn suspicion into proof. I went back through the folders I had already found, cataloging every invoice, every bank statement, every transfer that didn't belong where it should. I copied documents, made notes in the margins, circled numbers that jumped off the page. Where there were gaps, I filled them with calls. Discreet, careful, the kind you make when you don't want your voice recorded in the wrong place. Then I reached out to people who had known my husband and me for years. Not to shout accusations, but to listen. Former employees who had been quietly loyal, suppliers who still delivered on trust, an old accountant who had warned us once about creative bookkeeping. Some were cautious at first. Others, when they heard my tone, when they understood this was about truth more than spite, opened their doors. A woman who had worked in the office for 20 years told me things she had kept to herself because she loved the family. She spoke in a low voice about invoices readdressed, about checks sent to unfamiliar names. An old driver, who had been with us when there were only 2 trucks, remembered registration papers being switched. The more people I spoke to, the more threads I could pull on. Each story fit into the other like pieces of a puzzle. I found an ally in a man who had once been my husband's closest friend. He was sharp, the kind of person who noticed small discrepancies before they became problems. When I explained what I had discovered, his eyes narrowed and he said, "We'll need professional help. This isn't something you handle alone." I nodded. Pride and pain don't make good lawyers or investigators. I needed one, quietly and reliably. We brought in an attorney, not the flashy kind you see on TV, but a steady, methodical woman who read numbers the way others read hearts. She asked for everything I had. She sorted documents, requested official statements, and quietly issued subpoenas where they would do the most good. We did it carefully, so no sudden alarms would go off in my son's life until every step was in place. There were nights I thought about giving up, about confronting him and letting the world collapse in one storm. But every time I imagined that scene, I saw him slip through my fingers, covering his tracks while I watched. So I forced myself to be patient. I listened more than I spoke. I took what people offered, whether it was a ledger page or a memory of a conversation. I never reacted in public. I never hinted. At home, I kept the same tired voice, the same grief-worn jokes. No one suspected that the woman who once shook with helplessness now kept a list of accounts and a map of where each asset had been moved.
My attorney worked quietly to freeze accounts where we had evidence of unauthorized transfers. We filed motions that would tie up the money long enough to prevent it disappearing into the same shadowy places it had been sent to before. It was a careful dance. Legal traps set, paper filed, each signature obtained, felt like a stitch in a net I was slowly throwing over him. But legal moves alone weren't enough. I wanted witnesses who could speak to his behavior, to the pattern of lies, to the way he had reassigned properties and hidden trucks. So I gathered statements. Old employees who had been paid off, suppliers who had quietly been kept in the dark, a client who had been reassured while checks moved elsewhere. Their words were simple and raw: dates, phone calls, signatures. That simplicity is what made them powerful. Truth, when recited plainly, has a gravity that rumors never do.
All the while, I reminded myself why I was doing this. This wasn't about greed. I had learned the hard way that wanting money for its own sake corrupts the soul. No, this was about justice. It was about the life my husband had poured into something honest and the betrayal of his values by the person who should have protected them. It was about setting right the injury that had been done to the people who trusted that business to show up, to pay their bills, to feed their families. That was the pulse behind every paper I copied, behind every signature I got. As the trap took form, the plan became clearer. We would not ambush him in anger. We would not give him the chance to spin a story about misunderstandings. The evidence would be undeniable and public, and the law would back it up. We would call for the company's books to be opened in court, and we would reveal the transfers, the reassignments, the accounts where money had disappeared. When that happened, there would be nowhere for him to run. I thought about the moment I would face him. I pictured his shock when the papers were laid out, when the faces of people he had trusted spoke their truth under oath. I imagined the silence in the room as the weight of his choices finally settled on him. But the plan wasn't designed for spectacle alone. It was meant to be surgical. The goal was restoration, returning what had been taken, and more importantly, restoring the integrity the business once had. On more practical nights, I sat with maps of bank branches and timelines of transfers, connecting dots between dates and names. On lonely mornings, I replayed conversations in my head, refining the questions I would ask when the time came. I practiced staying calm. I rehearsed the way I would not let anger pull me off course, because the truth needed a steady voice. Rage would only muddy the water. There were moments of doubt. Friends asked if it was worth it. Why not let it go? They asked gently. Is the pain worth reopening old wounds? I listened and I understood their compassion, but I thought of my husband's hands, the rough palms that had held mine when we signed the first lease, the fingers that had traced our son's hair when he was a baby. I thought of how he had looked at our company like a promise. That promise had been broken. Someone had to be the one to gather the pieces. I kept my movements measured, my words scarce. When lawyers filed papers, when witnesses signed their names, when accounts were frozen, I felt the net tighten. The house that had felt like an island of lies slowly filled with the weight of truth. And still I kept up appearances. I drove my son to meetings sometimes, sat across from him at family dinners, laughed when he told small lies, and kept my face smooth. He saw a mother who accepted the story. He didn't see the woman who was quietly stripping away the mask he had built. At last, after months of quiet work, after every loose end had been chased down and every shaky testimony secured, everything was ready. The legal documents were in place, witnesses had agreed to speak, the bank had confirmed transfers and freezes, the court date had been set. I had the folder with the single page that would make denial impossible, the one transfer that led directly to his personal account. I sat at the kitchen table that night with the folder in front of me, feeling the weight of it as if it were a physical thing. There was fear, yes. Fear of what would happen when the curtain finally fell, fear of family shattered beyond repair. But beneath it all was a steady, cold resolve. This was not a trap set for spectacle. It was a remedy for an injury. It was the final act of fidelity to the man who had built our life from nothing. Everything was in place. Now, someone had to pull the trigger.
The day of reckoning came quietly. There were no thunderclaps, no warnings in the sky, just a morning like any other, sunlight spilling across the kitchen table where I sat with the folder in front of me. But inside, I knew everything was about to change. When my son walked into the room, his face was full of that same calm confidence he'd worn for months, the confidence of a man who believed his story had been swallowed whole, who thought his lies had built him a fortress. He sat down, poured himself coffee, and spoke casually, as though life were simple. That was when I slid the first document across the table. He glanced at it, then looked up at me. "What's this?" "An invoice," I said, my voice steady. "From last month. Paid in full. To a business you told me no longer exists." He laughed lightly, the way liars do when they think a smile will smooth everything over. "Oh, Mom, that must be old paperwork. You know how messy things get when everything is shutting down." I didn't blink. I reached into the folder and slid out the second paper. And this? A delivery receipt, signed 2 weeks ago. Same company name, same trucks. The smile faltered. His eyes shifted just for a moment, and I saw the crack appear. Before he could speak, I laid down the third sheet, a bank statement, the numbers circled in red. This account shows thousands flowing in and out long after you told me there was nothing left. Silence filled the room. His mouth opened, but the excuses were slower now, weaker. "It's complicated, Mom. You wouldn't understand the way these accounts—" I cut him off with the fourth page, the one transfer he couldn't deny. Money pulled straight from the company and placed into his personal account. His name, his signature, his betrayal in black and white. "This," I said, my voice shaking not with fear, but with fury, "is what I understand." The color drained from his face. His hands, once so confident, twitched against the table. His fortress crumbled brick by brick as the truth stood between us. For the first time in months, he looked small, not powerful, not clever, small. He whispered, "You don't know what you're doing." But he was wrong. I knew exactly what I was doing. I pushed the folder toward him, every page now in plain sight. "You lied to me. You tried to erase me. But I have everything. Witnesses, records, lawyers. The courts will see what you've done." His shoulders slumped, his voice cracked with desperation. "Please, Mom, we can work something out." But it was too late. The time for bargains had passed. I had already moved with the lawyer to freeze accounts, to reclaim assets, to bring the company back under the name it should never have lost. Piece by piece, his scheme unraveled. The trucks, the properties, the contracts, all stripped from his grasp and returned to their rightful place. And there he was, left standing in the wreckage of his own making. The son who thought he could outsmart his mother, undone by the very proof he thought she would never find. As I walked out of that room, folder in hand, I didn't look back, because the truth had spoken louder than his lies ever could. His betrayal had left him isolated, exposed. And for the first time since this began, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Justice was not loud. It was quiet, steady, undeniable. And it had finally arrived.
When the storm passed and the papers were signed, I sat alone in the quiet of my home, the silence louder than ever before. The truth had been revealed, justice had been served, and yet the ache inside me remained. I thought back to the moment my son first told me the business was gone, the way his voice trembled, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. Back then, I still wanted to believe him. I still wanted to hold on to the image of a son who would never betray his own mother. But now that image was gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces. Betrayal has a weight unlike any other. It isn't just about money or property, it's about trust. And when that trust is broken by someone you love, it doesn't heal cleanly. It leaves scars deep and jagged. And yet, through all the pain, I found something I hadn't expected. I found my own strength. For years, I had let myself believe I was only the wife who supported her husband, only the mother who stood behind her son. But when the truth came crashing down, I became something else. I became the woman who refused to be erased. I became the guardian of a legacy, the protector of a promise. The business was mine again. The papers said so, the courts said so, the lawyers confirmed it. But more than that, it felt mine again. Walking through the office, I could almost hear my husband's laughter, see his hand on my shoulder, feel his pride in the walls we had built together. His work had not been destroyed. It had been stolen, yes, but now it was restored. Still, not everything could be restored. My son, he no longer looked me in the eye the way he once did. Our conversations became short, strained, filled with silences that hurt more than words ever could. He avoided me, ashamed or perhaps angry that his scheme had failed. I couldn't tell which. Maybe it was both. And I realized something hard but necessary. Some bonds, once broken, cannot be mended. Forgiveness might come someday, but trust would never return in the same way. And maybe that was the true cost of his betrayal. Not the money, not the company, but the fracture in a bond that should have been unbreakable. Still, I carried no gloating in my heart. My victory was not loud. It was quiet, steady, full of dignity. I had not destroyed him. He had destroyed himself. All I had done was bring the truth into the light. And in that truth, I found peace. I knew I had honored my husband's memory. I knew I had protected the legacy we built together. And I knew that no matter what else life took from me, no one could ever again make me feel powerless in my own story. The business survived. The truth survived. And I survived. That was my victory. Quiet, but complete.
Betrayal has a way of changing you. It strips away the illusions you once held, the blind trust you thought was unshakable. It forces you to see people for who they truly are, not who you hoped they would be. I learned that money doesn't change a person's character. It only reveals it. For some, it brings out generosity and gratitude. For others, it awakens greed and selfishness they once kept hidden. My son's choices showed me a truth I never wanted to face, but one I could not ignore. And yet, in the middle of heartbreak, I discovered something else. Silence favors the betrayer. They count on you to stay quiet, to accept their lies, to bow your head and walk away. But justice belongs to those who refuse to be silenced, to those who gather their courage and say, "No, this is not the end of my story." I will not pretend the cost was small. I lost more than money. I lost the trust of someone I loved, and that wound may never fully heal. But I also gained something powerful.
the knowledge that I am stronger than betrayal. That truth, when revealed with patience and courage, can outshine even the darkest lie. And so, as I stand on the other side of this storm, I leave you with this. Be careful who you trust, but never let betrayal steal your voice. Because the greatest power you hold is not the wealth in your account or the possessions in your hand. It is the truth you carry. And the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always find its way into the light.